Hello, how are you? Today I'm going to answer a question that a lot of people ask me here on the channel. After all, what is the best type of sweet for people living with diabetes? This is very important because having a treat every now and then is part of our routine. But there are some sweets that make your blood sugar spike and others that keep everything more under control. So stick around until the end because I'm going to tell you which sweets you can incorporate into your daily diet in a healthy way. Before we start, I want to ask you if you're someone who usually eats sweets on a daily basis. Do sweets become part of your routine, for example, as a dessert, as your breakfast, as your afternoon snack, or are sweets more of a weekend thing for you for birthdays or special occasions? What's your favorite sweet? Write it for me down here in the comments. Remember to go ahead and like the video, that's super important to me. And if you know someone who lives with diabetes and has this question, share this video. Let's work together to expand this chain of kindness. Many people think that when we talk about diabetes and sweets, it's enough to just remove the sugar so that the sweet doesn't affect your blood sugar, your glucose, but that's not true. In fact, we see a lot of industrialized sweets out there that don't have sugar, but when someone with diabetes eats them, their blood sugar still goes through the roof. So I'm going to explain what you need to look for in your sweets, what you should seek out to make sure they're healthy for you and won't impact your blood sugar. When we think about sweets for diabetes, of course we think about removing simple sugar, white table sugar, added sugar, because it's one of the ingredients that will most affect your blood sugar. But besides that, ideally, we should try to add one of these 3 ingredients that I'm going to tell you about here. In fact, when I talk about each of these ingredients, don't worry, because I'll give you some examples of sweets that I've already made here on the channel, and I'll leave the links to them down below in the description so you can access the full recipe and watch the video to better understand how this logic works. Besides looking at the issue of sugar, which shouldn't be added, if you're going to buy an industrialized sweet or even make a dessert at home, it's very important to pay attention to the total amount of carbohydrates. Sometimes the dessert doesn't have added sugar, but it contains a lot of white flour, a lot of starch, foods that naturally behave like sugar because they quickly convert into glucose. So they can indeed cause a spike in glucose and a spike in insulin. For example, cakes. Sometimes a person makes a homemade cake without sugar, but with highly processed white flour with chocolate powder that contains sugar in its composition without realizing it. So all of this can definitely impact your glucose. In the same way, there are products that are sometimes sugar-free but have a large amount of carbohydrates. I mention this because there are some diet chocolate bars on the market, for example, and when you look at the amount of carbohydrates per bar in the traditional chocolate and in the diet chocolate, it's basically the same thing. So these details are very important for us to consider because carbohydrates turn into glucose and in excess, they will also impact your blood sugar. So let's talk about those more specific sweets I mentioned to you. When we look at a sweet, ideally it should have one of these 3 ingredients that I'm going to tell you about. Of course, ideally we should start by talking about protein, right? Because these days we know how important it is for blood sugar control, but it doesn't stop there. Protein can help increase muscle mass, and when we increase muscle mass, we increase glucose uptake independently of insulin. That in itself is already interesting. This obviously depends on strength training as well, like weightlifting, Pilates, water aerobics, or any activity that stimulates muscle growth. But it's not just because of that a protein dessert or anything rich in protein will help you control your blood sugar. No. When we consume more protein, we increase GLP-1, that satiety hormone in our intestines. And we talk a lot about this hormone nowadays when we talk about weight loss pens. I even have videos here on the channel comparing different weight loss pens, which also work very well for diabetes control when prescribed by a doctor. So if you're interested, I'll leave it down here. But as I mentioned, protein also stimulates the production of this hormone in the intestine, which we naturally produce in our bodies, and protein also increases the amount of time that food stays in our stomach. This is particularly good for blood sugar control because the longer it takes for food to move from the stomach to the intestine and then from the intestine into the bloodstream as sugar, the more stable this rise will be and the better it will be for you to prevent glucose spikes. I have some recipes for protein desserts here on the channel. I have recipes for diet flan, desserts, diet candies, like those gummy candies that kids like, but much higher in protein and homemade, 100% natural. And I have recipes for ice creams or desserts that are made with cottage cheese or ricotta. So when we think of a protein dessert, we think of a dessert that contains eggs, some kind of lean, high-protein white cheese, or even whey protein. I'll leave these recipes here for you to get inspired, and then you can tell me which one you liked the most. Besides that, of course, it's worth remembering that protein is a macronutrient that doesn't affect blood sugar in the same way that carbohydrates do. In the same way, healthy fats also have this beneficial effect. So if you don't want to base your healthy dessert on protein, you can base it on good fats. And it might sound funny to talk about basing a dessert on fat because people nowadays are usually afraid of fat, right? But obviously I'm not telling you to add refined oil or meat to your dessert. That's not the idea. The idea is for you to look for foods that are naturally rich in good fats. These good fats are very interesting for people living with diabetes because in the same way, they really slow down the absorption of stomach contents, so it will pass more slowly, just like with protein, actually even more slowly, from the stomach to the intestine and from the intestine to the bloodstream. Fat also has a very interesting effect because it gives our recipe a really nice creaminess. It adds a good amount of volume to the recipe, it helps with intestinal transit, makes it easier to eliminate stools, and helps prevent that bloated belly. And on top of all that, fat has a beneficial effect when it's a healthy fat because we know that some diabetics have a greater tendency to develop cardiovascular problems from consuming too much saturated fat, too much trans fat, and too many ultra-processed industrialized foods. So when you replace unhealthy fats with healthy fats, we can consume more monounsaturated and polyunsaturated fats, which are more beneficial for cardiovascular health. When we think about these good fats, we think of avocado, coconut itself, flaxseed, chia, even peanuts in moderation, and nuts in general, because they provide better satiety and of course don't impact blood sugar as much. So I have some really delicious recipes here, just to give you an example. I have a creamy 2-layer dessert made with peanut butter and chocolate, which is amazing. There's a wonderful chocolate ice cream that's made with avocado as the base. You wouldn't even guess it's avocado, it's super creamy. There's also a sweet treat, like a party sweet that you can add to your routine, made with peanut butter and chopped peanuts. So really, the sky's the limit. I'll leave these desserts here in the description so you can get inspired too. Another type of food you can think about basing your desserts on in your routine is fiber. And fiber is the only type of carbohydrate that doesn't impact blood sugar. I even have a video here on the channel talking about this because fiber is in fact a carbohydrate, but it can't be absorbed or metabolized by our body, so it passes through the digestive tract intact. This fiber is very interesting because, once again, it also slows down the absorption of any carbohydrate you might consume in that meal. It greatly facilitates the excretion of cholesterol through the stool, which is also good for people living with diabetes, and on top of that, it helps regulate bowel movements. So there are some examples of good fibers, like chia, for instance, where you get both healthy fats and fiber. Flaxseed as well, which is like chia's cousin, has a very similar composition. And if you want to focus basically on pure fiber, psyllium is an excellent option. It's that concept I always mention to you about sweets, that besides being delicious, they're also functional and bring beneficial effects. I have a cup of chia with yogurt and chocolate, which is amazing. I have a pot of chia with coffee that tastes like a tiramisu dessert. So there really are many fiber-based options that we can add to our routine. If you want, a very interesting strategy is to look for a dessert where you can combine these 3 types of ingredients. This dessert will give you a lot of satiety because you know, as I told you, that these 3 foods, these 3 ingredients really slow down digestive transit. So if you combine all 3, it really provides a lot of satiety. So for example, Patricia, give an example of a dessert that could be like that. A dessert where you use chia because it already has fiber and healthy fats and a protein like yogurt or cheese. In this case, you would already have these 3 healthy ingredients. But of course, there are many other combinations you can make. And as I mentioned, I'll leave a playlist of low-carb desserts here for you so you can get inspired. Another interesting point for us to discuss is the issue of sugar, or rather, the type of sweetener you use, because I don't recommend using sugar in any recipe if you are diabetic, since sugar causes your blood sugar, your glucose, to spike very quickly. In the same way, honey can have a negative impact. Some people still think that honey, because it's natural, is healthier for those living with diabetes, but it also raises blood glucose a lot. So ideally, you should use a non-caloric sweetener. I have a video here that I made recently, a guide to sweeteners, where I talk about sucralose, cyclamate, saccharin, xylitol, erythritol, stevia, monk fruit, and several other sweeteners, their differences, and which one is best suited for each preparation. And I think that if you don't usually use sweeteners, are about to start, or are unsure, like my recipe doesn't turn out right when I use this sweetener, watch this video because you'll get a lot of great tips. So let's also talk about what can make your dessert worse, right? If you sometimes add a healthy fat, add a protein, add some fiber, but even so your blood sugar is still going up, why do you think that happens? Often it's because you do this with a lot of simple carbs, meaning you use a starch base, a wheat flour base like I mentioned before, or you use some other type of sugar thinking it's healthier, for example brown sugar, demerara sugar, or honey. Even though they are less processed than white sugar, they still impact your blood sugar. So you really have to limit these ingredients if you live with diabetes in order to have a greater chance of enjoying sweets as part of a healthier routine in your daily diet. What I want to share with you in this video is the idea that sweets don't necessarily have to be just a dessert or something extra in your day. If you make a balanced, nutritious, healthy sweet, it can be your breakfast, your snack, or even your evening meal, and you can still keep your blood sugar under control. By knowing how to make good food combinations, we can add that sweet flavor even for those living with diabetes. If you like this kind of approach, I invite you to check out my glycemic playlist to help those living with diabetes. I'll leave the link for it down below in the description. Everyone is loving it. So tell me down below if you have the habit of eating sweets daily, or if you're afraid to eat them, if you knew you could eat sweets more flexibly, as long as they're healthy sweets. I'd love to see your comment. Remember to like the video, that really helps me here on the channel, and to share it with someone you love who lives with diabetes to help them in their daily life too. See you next time. Bye.